Have you noticed how you walk into certain rooms and immediately feel the need to make yourself smaller? Not in your body, inside. You start checking yourself like your presence needs permission before it's allowed to exist. Your voice softens before anyone says a word. Almost as if you're apologizing, not for what you did, but for being there at all. Maybe that's been living in you for a long time. It turns into background tension, a cautious way of moving through the world. And the question isn't, why is this here? But when did this start to feel necessary? Some children learn to read the room before they even know what that means. They can feel when something is off. Anger, addiction, almost no warmth. The bond doesn't feel steady. So a quiet question starts to form. How do I stay safe here? You notice that when you stay quiet, everything feels a little less intense. The system writes a rule. If I don't ask for much, I don't become a problem. You shrink your presence and lower your expectations of other people. A child doesn't think in right or wrong, only in what hurts less. Whatever works, they repeat until it feels natural, even if it means quietly abandoning themselves. A chameleon doesn't change color to stand out. It changes to avoid danger. Camouflage isn't self-expression, it's protection. For a child, it works the same way. When being seen doesn't feel safe, when speaking up brings tension, indifference, or rejection, when connection feels fragile, like it could disappear at any moment, the system pulls back. A developing brain doesn't ask what's fair. It only knows I depend on these people to survive. Adaptation becomes an automatic strategy running in the background long before identity has words. The chameleon isn't trying to shine. It's trying not to bother anyone, not to set anything off. Safety comes from being useful, not visible. It feels safer to be helpful than expressive. Presence turns into performance. Attention in childhood isn't extra. It's foundational. What the parents feel shapes what the child feels. Years later, the adult still carries that emotional climate inside. Not as loud pain, but as a steady sense of moving through life unseen. A child goes quiet when an inner voice starts whispering, "I'm not worth paying attention to." They stop asking. They stop reaching out. They might even stop celebrating their own birthday. It's not that their needs disappear, it's that their sense of worth fades. Their needs sink to the background. Everyone else's expectations move to the front. You start measuring yourself by other people's reactions and approval. This shows up in lopsided relationships. You bend, you hold back, you shrink. Underneath it all is the fear. If I show up as my whole self, I might lose the connection. And because the world quietly rewards this self-erasure, you keep adapting. Not to feel alive, but to stay included. Emotional neglect doesn't always look like shouting or obvious harm. Most of the time, it looks like absence. A lack of emotional availability day after day. Parents aren't always cruel, they're overwhelmed. Stuck in survival mode. Numbed by stress, depression, or their own unhealed pain. So they repeat what they never received. But the child is still left unattended inside. Their inner world goes unnoticed. Over time, their system learns to self-regulate alone. Neglect becomes something mechanical, quiet, routine, and treated as normal. The chameleon isn't faking. It is trading freedom for safety. Living through other people's eyes turns life into something you manage, not something you really live. What started as protection slowly hardens into limitation. You soften your impulses. You hold back your energy. You prune yourself to keep the environment predictable. Little by little, you stop letting your real strength lead. You start to feel stuck or behind in life, not because you lack ability, but because you never had clear permission to take up the space that was always yours. You learn to live under your own capacity. This pattern isn't conscious. No one sits down and decides to hand it over. It's absorbed through repetition, through tone, timing, and what never happens. What doesn't get named still gets learned. Parents who were never really seen don't know how to truly see. Parents in survival mode raise children in survival mode. Affection that was never lived doesn't flow easily. So the cycle rolls on without intention. Different faces, same pattern. Nothing explodes, nothing clearly interrupts it, until someone finally notices what has been running in the background. Here's the paradox. A relational wound turns into a systemic advantage. This pattern doesn't disrupt the system, it fits it perfectly. There's no obvious breakdown, no loud resistance, just quiet efficiency. From the outside, the adult performs well, responsible, reliable, productive, easy to work with. They're the one who doesn't complain, takes on extra work, adjusts to every demand. They don't make noise. They don't ask for much. They don't create friction. On the inside, there's self-abandonment. The child learned how not to disturb, how to regulate alone, how to anticipate needs, how to be useful instead of visible. And the system doesn't interrupt that because it works. It doesn't create the wound, but it recognizes the pattern and quietly benefits from people who learned how to disappear without collapsing. To live well isn't about leaving the system or becoming a better person. It's about seeing that adaptation is not the same thing as identity. You arrive at a quiet crossroads. Keep functioning the same way, or start existing even if that doesn't please everyone. The deepest kind of despair isn't pain. It's living as someone you're not. A life built only on adaptation keeps you below your own nature. You function. You survive. But something essential stays untouched. To exist fully asks for choice, not perfection. Choosing yourself doesn't erase fear. It happens alongside fear. Not choosing is still a choice, just a quieter one. And over time, it builds a life you never really claimed. Existence begins the moment you decide to step into your own skin. If any part of this sounded familiar, the point isn't to blame yourself. These patterns weren't mistakes. They were ways you learned to stay connected and alive. The work now is to notice where autopilot still runs the show, where you're still choosing adaptation without realizing it, where performance has taken the place of presence, and where you might be ready for something different. What would shift if you paused before shrinking? If you let yourself take up a little more space? If you stayed present instead of immediately adjusting? Not all at once, just enough to feel the difference. If this resonated, share in the comments what you noticed in yourself. And if someone came to mind who's been living quietly in the background, send this to them. Sometimes being seen begins with recognizing the pattern.